What's going on, guys? This is the Red Rogue, and today we'll be discussing leveling in Shadowlands. More specifically though, we'll be discussing the 3 specs of Rogue and my opinion about which one is the best choice for the level 50 to 60 grind. The key word there is opinion, so keep that in mind, and I'll give you the pros and cons that I've found for each of the 3 specs and the conclusion that I came to. So I'll start this off by saying, first and foremost, the best choice for leveling will depend very heavily on your preference and skill with each specialization of Rogue. Even if, say, Assassination was the best possible spec to level in, if you just don't like it or don't play the spec well, it will naturally not be the best for you. So keep that in mind that having fun is a pretty high priority. I just figured that this might be a fun little topic to discuss in anticipation for Shadowlands, and I like comparing the strengths and weaknesses of Assassination, Outlaw, and Subtlety. Also, this is directly targeted at the level 50 to 60 range of leveling we'll be doing in Shadowlands Zone, so please keep that in mind. So we'll go through the pros and cons of each spec, covering things like their unique toolkit and talents. Naturally, all 3 specs have fantastic defensives with Evasion and Cloak of Shadows, as well as great crowd control from things like Blind, Sap, Cheap Shot, and Kidney Shot. Stealth is also a massive benefit to the leveling process, as it lets you sneak past large amounts of adversaries that you might not need to kill just so you can get that one quest mob that you really need that has a really long respawn time. And then subsequently laugh when everybody else can't kill it because you snuck past all the trash. We'll start with Assassination. Assassination has a couple unique things in its toolkit besides its usage of poisons and bleeds for damage. A couple of strong things Assassination has going for it are its talents, both in war mode and non-war mode. Leeching Poison is a solid survivability gain in world content, as an extra 10% leech is pretty respectable for self-healing. It also has the benefit of turning Kidney Shot into a damaging finisher as well with internal bleeding, which will allow you to not only stun your targets, but still contribute a pretty sizable amount of damage to them. Assassination also has a nice benefit of being able to double dip its talent choices, if you're willing to go into war mode. Creeping Venom and System Shock can both provide nice single target DPS gains, as they add extra damage to your envenoms. For larger AoE bonuses, you could always stack Hidden Blades with Flying Daggers, the PvP war mode talent as well, though war mode isn't for everyone and can sometimes make leveling a bit of a hassle. Thankfully, as a sneaky boy, we can usually reap the rewards of extra talents and EXP boosts while avoiding most confrontations with stealth and CC. For abilities, Assassination has 1 charge of Shadow Step and the class-wide ability Sprint. Not a huge amount of mobility, but not too bad. For downsides of the spec, it is the least mobile of the 3, also the not too bad part of the mobility. It also relies a fair amount on damage over time, which results in a bit slower rate of defeating enemies. Assassination also doesn't gain the nature damage bonus of Shiv until level 58, which hampers the single target burst of the spec for most of the leveling process. Assassination will also suffer the most in regards to loss of AoE damage due to the removal of Azerite powers like Shrouded Suffocation and Echoing Blades, and the rotation will be slower without Azerite essences like Memory of Lucid Dreams. Outlaw is next in our comparison. This is, of course, my preferred spec, so I'll try to avoid too much bias in the pros and cons for it. For pros, Outlaw has the only movement ability that doesn't require a target to use. Grappling Hook, to me, gains a slight advantage in that regard, as there may be times where you need to tag an enemy about to die, but you can't quite Shadow Step to it just yet, but Grappling Hook will let you reach it. Grappling Hook also has an impressive 40-yard range versus the 25-yard range of Shadow Step. We'll gain a rank 2 bonus for Grappling Hook at level 56, reducing the cooldown by 15 seconds, and we can also talent into Retractable Hook for another 15-second reduction, bringing it to the same cooldown as Shadow Step. However, another big benefit of Outlaw is its cooldown reduction through Restless Blades and True Bearing. These both help bring the cooldowns of a majority of our moves by quite a bit, especially if talented into Marked for Death for some easy combo point spam, meaning you're getting Sprint and Grappling Hook off of cooldown way faster. Outlaw's survivability isn't quite as strong as Assassination's or Subtlety's, since you have to roll into your leech buff by gaining the Grand Melee Roll the Bones effect, which you can't reliably do all the time unlike the Leeching Poison talent, especially since Roll the Bones has a cooldown now. Blade Rush does help fill in some extra mobility for the spec, as it gives us a nice little 20-yard lunge attack. Gouge is also still only an Outlaw specific move, which is a pretty big CC for interrupting things. For War Mode talents, some of the better options for leveling would be Take Your Cut, Boarding Party, and Cheap Tricks. Take Your Cut is free haste every time we roll for buffs, which is going to be right before we attack something, so that's pretty good. Boarding Party gives us a little extra movement with every Between the Eyes cast, and Cheap Tricks gives us free pistol shot casts for 5 seconds after using Between the Eyes, which can be very handy if you're out of energy or something is far away and you just need to hit it a couple times. Outlaw also has the best AoE right off the bat going into Shadowlands with Blade Flurry, which makes killing multiple enemies at a time much easier for us pirate boys. For cons, probably the two biggest ones are the random nature of Roll the Bones and the self-sustainability for health. Outlaw is the only one of the 3 specs that doesn't have a talent that can really bump up its self-healing to that same level, other than Iron Stomach, which relies on health stones, health potions, and Crimson Vial. This is still obviously the best choice, but it used to be much better when there was a shorter cooldown on health potions, but now they're 5 minutes, which really negatively affected this talent. We do have Leech in the Grand Melee buff, but again, we can't just re-roll all the time now that it's on a cooldown. And lastly, Subtlety. Subtlety has a pretty darn strong toolkit, though it does have a few flaws. Subtlety has by far the best burst damage of the 3 specs, which can make getting through some of the more badass enemies you'll come across a little easier. No joke, unless they've done some tuning on a few of them, there are a couple that are actually pretty hard to solo, even if you're relatively well geared. Subtlety also gains 2 charges of the potent Shadow Step movement ability, which already gives it a leg up over Assassination and Outlaw to a degree. Probably the biggest advantage though is the free teleportation of Shadow Strike when used from stealth. This alone gives Subtlety the best mobility of the 3 specs. The new Premeditation talent is also a strong choice while leveling, as it basically will allow us to always have Slice and Dice up whenever we attack something from stealth, and it'll give us extra combo points for free if Slice and Dice is already active when we use it. The last big talent option we have as our advantage as a Ninja Sneaky Boy is Soothing Darkness, which is by far the biggest self-heal benefit of the 3 specs. Basically, as long as we're stealthed or in Shadow Dance, we'll heal for 3% of our max health every second. For War Mode talents, there isn't really a whole lot going on, though Dagger in the Dark does allow for some pretty strong burst hits when you Shadow Strike someone that was nearby you from stealth, as it gets a stacking damage debuff on them. Veil of Midnight is a nice little defensive too, as the first 2 seconds after stealth or vanish fall off means 100% dodge chance, so that's kinda cool for survivability. You can also choose Thief's Bargain if you want to make Vanish an even shorter cooldown, allowing you to reset combat much more often, which is pretty nice. And Cold Blood is a minute cooldown that lets you chunk down the health of a badass enemy by 10% with your next Cheap Shot or Shadow Strike if you want. For cons, the biggest would be the limitations induced by Shadow Dance. Since this move is what lets us spam all those juicy Shadow Strikes, and the cooldown is reduced on the move by spending combo points, it can be a bit tricky to keep the combo points rolling if things die in the first few hits. This in turn means less combo points spent, which means less Shadow Dance charges generated. This can be remedied slightly by getting an extra charge of Shadow Dance with the Enveloping Shadows talent, which is our go-to option, but it can still result in times where you just don't have any charges and no way to get them off of cooldown quickly. Subterfuge does allow us to get in some extra Shadow Strikes every time we come out of stealth, which makes this an exceptionally important talent to use while leveling. For AoE damage, Subtlety has to rely entirely on Shuriken Storm and Secret Technique until level 52, where it picks up Black Powder. However, you don't get the empowered rank 2 version until level 58, and Shuriken Storm won't apply Find Weakness until level 56. Due to this, its AoE damage will suffer until you're almost entirely through the leveling process, but once you do pick up all these extra benefits, it's pretty solid. As I mentioned in the beginning though, you should level in whatever spec you play the best at and have the most fun in, especially since they've already made it where there is no reset in the first week of Shadowlands since it's dropping like right before reset day. Leveling isn't terribly difficult in the first place, but if you wanted to do it quickly and just enjoy being a rogue in general, this would be my order of how strong each one is as a leveling spec. Again, this is solely based on my opinion after weighing the pros and cons of each one, so take this with a grain of salt. Subtlety wins the top spot entirely because of its exceptional mobility with Shadow Strikes from stealth and its strong single target burst damage. While it doesn't have a full AoE damage toolkit until level 58 due to all the rank bonuses of Black Powder and Shuriken Storm, it still gets a lot of bonus points for the exceptional healing of Soothing Darkness. Outlaw unfortunately comes in right behind Subtlety, mainly due to the weaker self-healing toolkit and heavier reliance on cooldown reduction via Restless Blades or True Bearing to get its mobility off of cooldown more often. Outlaw has some pretty decent war mode talents to speed up leveling, then it doesn't have to worry much about the extra benefits it will pick up while leveling, unlike Subtlety. This gives it a bit of an advantage in the early levels as Blade Flurry is a solid AoE move. Grappling Hook also does have a few benefits that Shadow Step and Shadow Strike just can't beat with teleportation needing a target, but the less frequent usage negatively affects it. And lastly, Assassination. Unless you're a really die-hard fan of the spec, it is the least impressive of the three to level in my opinion. It does have a pretty strong self-heal with Leeching Poison, and if you're in war mode then Flying Daggers can be pretty strong if you're fighting numerous enemies. However, it has the lowest amount of mobility, no cooldown reduction effects, and overall some pretty weak AoE if you're not in war mode, though it does have slightly more than Subtlety in the first couple levels. It is also just scaling really weak at the time of this video, sitting as the lowest damaging spec of the three rogues. I really and truly hope for the sake of other assassination rogues out there that they will see some tuning in favor of the spec. Anyways, that about sums up my thoughts and opinions and the pros and cons that I've weighed for each of the three specs of rogue as far as leveling in Shadowlands goes. Let me know in the comments below what you're planning to level as, and also what you thought of my opinions and the balancing between pros and cons that I found between the three specs. I hope this video was helpful to you, and if so, any likes, comments, or new subscribers are all fantastic ways of showing your support for the channel. If you're new around to my little corner of the YouTube algorithm, then I'd like to welcome you to check out the rest of the channel. I do new uploads every weekday on a variety of content, ranging from things like guides, add-ons, weak auras, tutorials, and of course rogue-specific things. I'd also like to take this time to thank all of my regular viewers, commenters, subscribers, and especially my patrons, who all help make these Shiba Shenanigans possible. Thank you all so much for watching. This was the Red Rogue, and I'll see you guys around.